Today we're doing the goniometry measurement of the hand. We'll be doing the flexion for the second MCP joint. So we're gonna have the hand in neutral on the table with the ulnar shaft along the table. You wanna have the thumb on the dorsal side of the hand facing the ceiling. Hand in neutral, fingers out. You wanna have the fulcrum on the second MCP joint on the hand. The stabilizing arm down the second metacarpal. You would have the movement arm on down to the second DIP of the finger. Then you want to ask the patient to actively flex their second MCP joint and measure the range of motion on that. So 180 minus 120, she got 60 degrees. And now we're going to bring it back and put it into passive range of motion. And she got 65 degrees of range of motion. So the normal range of motion for this is 90 to 100. So her hands are below the normal amount. And performing this, we did get a firm end feel. The goniometry measurement on the hand, we'll be doing active and passive range of motion of the second phalange, the extension of the second MCP joint to be specific. For this position, the patient will have their ulnar shaft along the table, their hand in neutral, thumb on the dorsal side of the hand facing up, fingers extended. You want to keep the fulcrum on the second MCP joint right here. You want to then keep the stabilizing arm along the second metacarpal and the movement arm at neutral along the proximal phalanx of the second phalange. You then have the patient actively flex their second phalange or actively extend. The patient got 65 on the range of motion. Now, going into passive range of motion, the patient is at 85 degrees of passive range of motion, and both of these gave a firm end feel, and the normal range of motion that should be for this hand is between 20 and 45 degrees. Today's test, we're doing the goniometry measurement of the second MCP joint for abduction on the hand. So the patient will have the arm flat on the table, palm side down. You want to have the hands spread and keep them finger neutral with the fulcrum on the second MCP joint, the stationary arm on the second metacarpal, and the movement arm down the proximal phalanx of the second phalange. Since we're measuring abduction, you'll have the patient do active abduction. The measurement is 19 degrees, and then bring them back to neutral and measure it passively, so I will do it. We got 20 degrees of passive range of motion, and both of these giving a firm end feel, with the normal range of motion should be around 25. We're doing the goniometry test for the hand, where we're doing active and passive range of motion of the second PIP joint for flexion. So for this, we want the patient have their hand on the table, pinky side down, thumb on top, hand in neutral. You want to have the fulcrum along the PIP joint, second PIP joint. You want to have the stabilizing arm along the proximal phalanx and the movement arm along the middle phalanx. You want to keep the hand in neutral. Then you would have the patient actively flex their PIP joint and measure the degrees. So we got 54 degrees of flexion. Now I'll do passive. And we got 77 degrees of flexion. And for this, the book states you usually get a hard end feel, and with Taylor I did get a hard end feel. And it also states normal range of motion should be between 100 and 110. Goniometry assessment, we'll be doing the hand for active and passive range of motion of the second DIP extension. So we'll have the fulcrum, after having the hand lying on the table, hand out, thumb on top. We'll have the fulcrum along the DIP joint of the second phalange, the stabilizing arm along the middle phalanx, with the movement arm along the distal phalanx. Starting off in neutral, you're going to have the patient actively extend their DIP joint. Start off in neutral again. Okay, we got 12 degrees of extension. Now passively extend. I got 32 degrees of extension. Both of these give me a firm end feel, and the normal range of motion for active should be 8, and for passive it should be 20 degrees of extension. For this test, we're going to do the goniometry measurement of the wrist. We're going to be doing the carpal ulnar flexion, active and passive range of motion. To start this off, you want to have the hand in neutral off the table, or put the fulcrum along the triquetrum, the stabilizing arm along the ulnar shaft, and the movement arm down the fifth metacarpal. You then put the wrist into flexion and measure down the fifth metacarpal, which gave us a range of motion of 57. And then bring the hand back up. Put the fulcrum on the triquetrum, ulnar shaft, fifth metacarpal, and now passively flex. She got 85 degrees of passive flexion. The normal end feel for both of these was firm, and the normal range of motion you should get for both of these should be between 60 and 80 degrees. We'll be doing the goniometry measurement of the wrist. We'll be doing the carpal ulnar extension. So for this, we're going to have the fulcrum along the triquetrum, stabilizing arm along the ulnar shaft, and the movement arm down the fifth metacarpal. So we're going to keep it in neutral 180. Have the patient actively extend their wrist. And she got 75 degrees of extension actively. And when put in a neutral and passively extended, she got 75 degrees of extension. So she had a firm end feel for both of these, and the normal should be between 60 and 75, so she's right on the dot.
This is the goniometry video for the wrist radial deviation. The patient will be sitting with their arm on the table, hand palm side down. Their elbow should be in 90 degrees of flexion and shoulder in 90 degrees of abduction. The fulcrum of the goniometer will go over the capitate bone, and the stabilizing arm along the dorsal side of the forearm. The movement arm along the third metacarpal for reference. We will ask the patient to radially deviate on their own first, and with their hand flat on the table. He got about 12 degrees of AROM. And then passive range of motion, he gets about 15 degrees. A normal end feel is hard, and the normal ranges of motion are between 20 and 25 degrees. This is the goniometry assessment for ulnar deviation of the wrist. The patient will be sitting with their hand on the table, palm face down, the elbow 90 degrees flexed and shoulder 90 degrees abducted. The fulcrum goes over the capitate bone, and the stabilizing arm goes up the dorsal side midline of the forearm, and again the measurement arm goes down the shaft of the third metacarpal. We will ask the patient to ulnar deviate to test active range of motion, so go ahead. And he got about 25 degrees, and then passively he gets about 35 degrees. The end feel is firm, and normal range of motion measurements are between 30 and 40 degrees. This is the goniometry video for radiohumeral flexion. The patient will be lying supine with the arm in anatomical position. The fulcrum of the goniometer goes over the lateral epicondyle, and the stabilizing arm will go up the lateral midline of the humerus using the center of the acromion process for reference. The motion arm will go along the lateral midline of the radius using the radial styloid process for reference. The patient will then actively flex their elbow, and the range of motion is 125 degrees. And then with passive, reestablishing the goniometer, with passive range of motion, the patient will get 134 degrees of flexion. Normal range of motion is between 140 and 150 degrees, and there is a normal end feel of soft. This is the goniometry video for elbow extension. The patient will be lying supine with the arm in anatomical position and slightly off the table. The fulcrum will go on the lateral epicondyle of the humerus, and the stationary arm goes up the lateral midline of the humerus to the acromion process for reference. The position or movement arm will go along the lateral midline of the radius down to the radial styloid process for reference. The patient will go ahead and extend the arm actively as much as they can, which he has no movement, so it will be 0. And then passively, he gets about -1 degree of extension. The normal range of motion for extension of the elbow is 0 degrees, and the normal end feel is hard because of the olecranon process. This is the goniometry video for pronation. The patient will be short sitting with their elbow flexed to 90 degrees, their hand in a fist around a pencil for reference. The fulcrum of the goniometer will go along the middle of the third proximal phalanx. The stabilizing arm will be perpendicular to the ground, and the movement arm will be in line with the pencil. We will ask the patient to go ahead and pronate, just making sure that stays the same with the fulcrum and stabilizing arm. The patient got about 90 degrees, or exactly 90 degrees in active range of motion. Now to passively pronate the wrist, we will bring them down and see how far they can go using the pencil as reference. Now with passive range of motion, there is about 104 degrees. The normal range of motion is 90 degrees, and the normal end feel is hard. This is the goniometry video for supination of the wrist. The patient will be short sitting with the elbow flexed to 90 degrees and the hand holding a pencil in a fist. The fulcrum of the goniometer will go on the middle of the third proximal phalanx. The stabilizing arm will go perpendicular to the ground, and the movement arm will be in line with the pencil they are holding. We will ask them to actively supinate, so go ahead and do that, making sure you're still stable. And in line with the pencil, you will get about 100 degrees of active range of motion, so go back to normal. And passively, patient will get 105 degrees. The normal range of motion is 90 degrees, and the normal end feel is firm. This is the goniometry video for horizontal abduction of the shoulder. The patient will be short sitting with their arm up into flexion and the thumb facing the ceiling to ensure no torso rotation with abduction. The fulcrum will be placed on the top of the AC joint, the stabilizing arm facing out with the movement arm both parallel to the ground. The movement arm will follow the shaft of the humerus. So we will have the patient actively abduct the shoulder, and the range of motion is about 65 degrees. And then passively, we will abduct, ensuring no torso rotation, and holding it there. He got about 73 degrees. The normal range of motion is about 45 degrees, and the normal end feel is firm. This is the goniometry video for horizontal adduction of the shoulder. The patient will be short sitting with their arm up with the thumb facing the ceiling and flexed arm, shoulder. The fulcrum will be on the AC joint and the stabilizing arm parallel to the ground coming forward, the movement arm parallel to the midline of the humerus. The patient will adduct actively, and the range of motion is 40 degrees, and then passively we will adduct the arm, and the patient gets 48 degrees. The normal range of motion is 135. The normal end feel is soft or firm.